Hi everyone, Ed Amorosa here from Tag Cyber, and I'm sitting with my friend Patrick Harding, who is the CTO of Ping Identity. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming to visit.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, steamy day here in New York City. Right?
Yeah, love-hate relationship with New York.
Spoken like a true Bostoner.
Yes, exactly.
A little bit nicer up there.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm the CTO of Ping. Been at Ping now for 12 years. Prior to that, comp sci major originally, developer. Ended up at a company called Fidelity Investments for a while, where I first got involved in security. Built out the first sort of firewall architecture there back in the late 90s on Fidelity.com.
Wow.
Ended up in consulting for a while, then back at Fidelity. And I remember a guy who was the enterprise architect there, probably in about 2001, said, "Patrick, why don't you go dig into identity, see what you find?" And I've been digging in ever since. So that's sort of how long I've been doing this for. So Ping's been great ride. I started there when we sort of had no customers and no revenue, and somewhat of a product. And 12 years later, we've sort of grown up a little bit. Ping's now about sort of 600 employees, about 1,500 customers, multiple products. Obviously heavily into identity and access management now. Broadened our portfolio since we started in single sign-on. So it's been an exciting ride.
Early 2000s probably the perfect time to ride the identity and access management wave, right? Because I'll bet you're using Firewall 1 or something, right?
Actually, no. Fidelity didn't. We were using open source, like Internet Packet Filter or Firewall Toolkit.
Cool.
Oh yeah.
That from TIS.
Yes,
I had that. I used that
yes,
toolkit.
Yes,
that was cool.
It was hardcore.
But after you get that working, the next step was identity and access. So you probably got right at the ground level. Right?
So it was interesting. The opportunity was there because literally I was living the problem of continuing to poke holes in the firewall, and thinking there's got to be a better way than just continuing to poke holes. And let's level up and look at the next level of what's going on, which is really more around sort of who is accessing and using these resources and applications. Can we put some controls around that? But I actually got involved on the standards side, actually, on the Liberty Alliance, which was essentially the Sun-sponsored alternative to Microsoft Passport, if you know your history. And sort of Liberty ended up creating a lot of the technology that became the underpinnings of SAML 2.0. And it was SAML that really opened up the ability for organizations to securely sort of interact with sort of their business partners, but also cloud and SaaS applications, and sort of to enable single sign-on that way. And that's where Ping got its start back in the day.
Is that what brought you to Ping, or were you doing that once you got to Ping?
No, that's what I was doing. I was actually doing that through Fidelity, and met the sort of CEO and founder of Ping, Andre Durand, through that. He had some other interesting ideas about the business model for Ping at the time. Fortunately, we turned it into sort of more of a federation opportunity. And sort of our initial product was Ping Federate, which is still going strong, but really it's been helping lots of organizations solve those problems. Now, it was probably 2 or 3 years in at Ping, probably in the sort of 07, 08 timeframe, where the emergence of SaaS and enterprises adopting SaaS applications and realizing that they didn't want their users to be logging into SaaS applications independently. And they wanted to, leverage their enterprise credentials more often than not Active Directory, and Ping came in to help them essentially address that problem and integrate, all of their complex sort of internal IAM infrastructure they put in place with, Oracle or CA or IBM or whatever, and we helped bridge that to the cloud.
In those early days, was it mostly IT teams that you were dealing with?
Yeah, very well. It was often IT teams.
Security
absolutely.
teams had no clue, right?
No, they hadn't. The identity access management capabilities inside organizations was either tied back to who was running Active Directory and responsible for that, or who might have been responsible for a web access management product they put in place internally. But rarely was that falling under the security team at the time, or the CISO, or anything like that. It was definitely more on the sort of the IT side in those situations. We were also helping organizations sort of enable their revenue or customer facing applications as well to support single sign-on through SAML there as well. A couple of use cases. One was, I'll call it inbound single sign-on, where a company like Fidelity or State Street had a bunch of enterprise customers and they wanted to support single sign-on for the users or of those organizations coming in, or they wanted to integrate into third-party applications that they were white labeling. So in the case of Bank of America, one of our customers, it might have been their bill payment or their check fulfillment sort of applications. So we were being integrated into their customer-facing applications as well. And in those cases, it was more a sort of an enterprise architect or security architect who had been asked to find a tool to help solve those problems in those cases.
It seemed like federation in that early era was kind of a chaotic mess. Seemed like it was sort of ad hoc, like you didn't quite know who was federating with who or who supported what. And depending on, am I reading that right? It's
Yeah,
just
I think
my memory of maybe it's early 2000s.
I think
it seemed like it was a mess.
It was early technology. So you had a number of standards that were doing similar things. You had the original SAML 1 that then became SAML 2.
PKI was coming of age then.
This was probably just after PKI. The whole, PKI, this is the year of PKI. That all happened like in the late 90s. This was probably, SAML is probably a result of PKI not working, essentially. Really, it was the next attempt to solve it. But then you also had Microsoft and IBM positioning some stuff called WS Federation, which was part of their WS Star stack of sort of SOAP services. So there was some probably a little bit of confusion in the market at the time about which standard would emerge to basically solve those problems. And again, this was all in the time of web services and XML and SOAP and stuff like that. So SAML 2 sort of emerged to address that. I would sort of thank Google and Salesforce actually as the two large SaaS vendors who got on board SAML 2, adopted it, and then essentially the rest of the industry followed from there.
Has SaaS really changed the game now? Like since kind of 07, 08?
Absolutely,
there really is the dominant
Yep.
architectural influence.
Yes.
And IAM, is that a true statement?
That was true then, absolutely. I think everybody at that time was thinking they were outsourcing certain business applications to SaaS as much as possible. They needed to integrate those SaaS applications into their existing IAM infrastructure, and federation was the right way to do that. And everybody got on board doing that sort of thing actually at the time.
It seems like Active Directory is the thing that pulls you back, almost like a rubber band. Active Directory sits home. You want to do any sort of LDAP or AD, and you're promiscuous out in the cloud, but when all push comes to shove, wherever the Active Directory is, it seems like that's where the center of gravity is. Is that still true?
I think it is. But what's changing is Microsoft is obviously pushing heavily for their customers to move to Azure Active Directory.
In their own cloud, right?
Yeah, in their own cloud. And
Smart move.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason Active Directory got such traction and became the predominant directory in the enterprise was because it was so closely associated with Microsoft Exchange, the email environment. And they have the same thing happening now in the cloud, where Azure Active Directory is necessary to use Office 365. Everybody is going to Office 365. Nobody wants to run on-prem Exchange anymore.
Right.
They've lived that nightmare. They want to get off it. So now they're moving out to Azure Active Directory. And it's our belief, we're not trying to build anything competitive to Azure Active Directory at Ping. We're actually partnering with Microsoft.
Makes sense.
Because previously you wanted to do outbound single sign-on from your Active Directory and your sort of employee portal internally, out to SaaS applications. Organizations now actually are realizing we have an inbound SSO problem. We want to use Azure Active Directory as a cloud-based directory, but we want to support SSO from it into all of those applications we actually have still internally. So we're actually helping Microsoft sort of address a problem going forward, and I see it something that the whole world went upside down, so to speak, and will continue to do so over the next few years.
Is mobility just a bigger force? You think that will have just as much influence, say, in the next few years or so?
Yes. So it's interesting. A customer I was talking to recently coined, sort of used as an example that they want to get to something called sort of zero trust. Okay, and it's one of those high-level terms that a lot of people have their own terminology for, but implicit in that is the notion that the internet's become the network, the cloud has become the data center, and identity is the new perimeter, essentially. So the goal of that for them is to allow what I've called coffee shop IT, literally the ability for a worker to be sitting at Starbucks with a device that they sort of have. It could be personal, it could be corporate, and they should be able to get the work done they normally get done as easily and seamlessly as if they were sitting at their desk in their office. Obviously, under the covers, you have to have equivalent set of security infrastructure and processes in place to address that. At its core, I think it starts with identity and access management. But that's going to be users leveraging their iPhone, their iPad, their desktop, whatever it might be. So to me, mobile just implies remote, working from anywhere on any network.
I mean, that's the essence of virtual private infrastructure, right? In some sense, I'm assuming the zero trust means I have no trust in the underlying infrastructure, so let's build virtual containerized compute. Do you see, is container a term that's used in the same sentence with IAM?
Not really. I think, so there's a couple of dirty words, I think, that we sort of hear. One is VPN. People would prefer not to solve this through VPN technology and have to live through
kind of clumsy,
difficult certificates, things like that. The other is containerization, because I think people have lived through the experience of Citrix and VMware, and does that translate as well to the mobile device like the iPhone, the iPad, and people want a consistent user experience. I'd sort of say that the fourth tenet that I would add to what I described earlier is that organizations are looking for their users to have a consumer-like experience. And that's sort of really what they're trying to drive towards, and get away from the old clunky sort of enterprise IT sort of way you did things, and get their users comfortable enough that it's more consumer-like. And you name a technology that hasn't shifted from the consumer world into the enterprise world over the years. It's always gone in that direction.
With all these as-a-service capabilities that you can sign up for, every vendor you deal with now wants to sell you database as a service, or compute as a service, or whatever they do as a service, HR as a service. How hard is it to set up SSO and kind of a virtual hybrid enterprise, where the identity makes it look like everything's one click away, and I don't have to re-authenticate? Is that something you guys spend a lot of time on?
Not anymore. I think there's a recognition now that applications are starting to support the standards out of the box, whether it's SAML from a few years ago, or more recently something like OpenID Connect, which is a sort of a consumer-oriented SSO protocol that you're going to see more and more use of. On the application side, it's very easy to adopt that. So more applications are just supporting this natively. A little like back 15 years ago when LDAP was a big thing, and suddenly every application you saw sort of just had LDAP, check the box. We support LDAP basically at the time. OpenID Connect is actually it's shifting in that direction. So applications are going to support that. Now that doesn't mean that you want to put trust in the application for all the OpenID Connect IDPs it might want to support. You sort of might want to centralize that, but getting the SSO up and running today actually isn't particularly difficult.
That's good news.
So, you mentioned the as-a-service stuff. Funnily enough, in most large enterprises, I've always viewed only about 20% of apps in a large enterprise actually can be pushed out to sort of leverage SaaS.
20%?
20%, just because that's that's about the number of sort of off-the-shelf applications they have available that they can consume. It might be HR or payroll or email, benefits, collaboration, stuff like that. But there's another...
The more generic, the better?
Absolutely, the generic stuff. 80% of them, and this number's up into the hundreds, if not thousands in large organizations, are sort of custom developed apps that they've built out for their own specific business needs. And in whatever vertical they're in, things like that. It's those apps that have traditionally been running in data centers that we're seeing now big trend, moving those apps out to run in a public cloud infrastructure, whether it's like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform, or even sort of I'll call it a sort of a private cloud type environment like SoftLayers from IBM, something like that. And a lot of those organizations now are seeing an opportunity to sort of modernize their IAM infrastructure as they take those applications out to those public clouds and make them look and feel more like SaaS applications in terms of having them support open standards for SSO, like OpenID Connect, or support open standards for provisioning, like SCIM, which is the system for cross-domain identity management. It's a sort of provisioning interface. So we're seeing that's a huge trend that's occurring right now, where people want to go sort of migrate those sort of workloads away.
It's fascinating. What is the role of analytics in identity and access management kind of moving forward? Do you see that as kind of embedding into the fabric of identity to identify threats, to look for anomalies? Is that one of the new areas that we should be expecting to see more powerful capability?
Certainly going to be seeing it from Ping. I would say today, or to date, IAM has been very statically driven. Policies have been static. You have a fixed set of IP addresses in terms of where, in relation to your access management and access control lists to access an application. Your multi-factor authentication capabilities tend to be, they're adaptive in that you can set them up such that if if the user's on this network or using a device that's not managed, authenticate them in this way, basically, things like that. But what hasn't been integrated in yet to date, and I term this sort of intelligent identity, is the use of analytics like machine learning and behavioral analytics based on the IAM data, but based on also incorporating application data, where you can do behavioral analysis on that and look to see, is there any anomalous behavior occurring for these users or these devices, and turn that into a risk score and feed that into your authentication time for sort of risk-based MFA, or feed it into at SSO time, so you can sort of apply risk before users SSO anywhere, or even apply it at access time for risk-based access as well, so that you can get a situation where if a user is already in session in an application, has been issued a cookie, and that cookie's been compromised some way, it's been hijacked. All right. Today, generally speaking, it's tough to detect that it might not be the real user on the end of the device anymore. If you can start to inject risk analysis at session management time, you can start to do things like, if the risk profile changes, maybe kill the session or redirect the user for stronger authentication or some such thing. So
today, those types of analyses complement the more static authentication. Do you ever see intelligence taking over and really making a determination about, yes, Patrick can touch this application because I've looked contextually at what's going on, and I'm machine learning, and I proclaim that it looks like this is safe. Are we headed for that?
That's really good. That gets to how do you trust the machines?
AI is about making decisions, right?
Yes. So I think the technology will allow that eventually, and the technology will likely, probably in 5 years' time or so, actually be able to make better decisions faster than a human could, even if the human was given an alert and asked to basically do something and look at something. The question becomes, at what point do you let the machine react and actually change the behavior of the end user? I could see that happening in sort of employee-facing, workforce-facing applications, where the ramifications of getting it wrong aren't as great. But say on customer-facing applications that are revenue-generating, user experience is always key there. So I think that'll lag a little bit. It's a little like self-driving cars. All right. At what point do you truly trust self-driving cars to make autonomous decisions on the road? Okay. We're on a similar path to a point in time where I think we as sort of individuals are going to have to make that intuitive leap to say the machine is going to make a better decision than the user can, and
Well,
we're
for
going to be okay
both
with that.
autonomous cars and for authentication, it's not about when do you get to perfect trust, it's when is the trust greater than what we have now.
Yes.
And for autonomous vehicles, 30,000 people or something die every year or something. So there's a pretty low bar there. I mean, I think we probably would be better off if we had autonomous cars tomorrow.
Yes.
And I often wonder, with the advances, Jeffrey Hint and all these guys making algorithmic and parallel processing advances in machine learning, deep learning, and so on. I think we're really close to the point where companies like Ping will, I'm certain you guys will find a way to embed those advances into the
So there was two things. I talked about this at our Cloud Identity Summit this year, some of the ramifications.
That's a great summit, by the way.
Well, thank
will
you.
call out. You guys run a great conference.
So I misnamed it. We actually changed the name to Identiverse. So if you're going to look for it now, look for
Identiverse. That's a good name.
Yes, Identiverse now. So I did it, part of my talk there was about some of the ramifications of intelligence as applies to identity. And a couple of things that one of the things I actually was talking about was the need for oversight. And that if it's completely okay to let the machines take over, but the humans should have the option of oversight and to be able to, I don't know, pull the plug, pull the wire, make the final decision if necessary. And that's, I think, going to be important. As well as visibility. So users need to have visibility into what's going on and how the machine got to the point that it chose to make a decision as well.
Right.
So that's going to be very, very important, I think.
It's exciting to see a technology like identity and access management, which we would both acknowledge had humble roots in IT.
Yes.
Maybe even the word mundane might have been used 15 years ago. And now we're talking about using AI to make kind of cool decisions. That's a nice journey.
So it's incredible to me. So just something as simple as what we think of as multi-factor authentication. And I came out of the financial services space, you came out of telco, where it was fairly well understood why that was important. Even today, it's not predominant on customer-facing applications, things like that. I would say we could do a lot more.
Absolutely not.
No.
Sure.
So I'm very happily seeing now, companies that we're working with, for example, building consumer electronic equipment. All right, that they sell into the home and they install in the basement. That becomes your router and stuff like that. And that these organizations, as those devices get smart and sort of become sort of IoT enabled, and that these organizations now building out customer portals so that their users, their customers, can basically log in to access and control and manage those devices. These companies are putting optional two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication on their customer portals. And this is something that was the domain of Fiserv 10 years ago, and now it's becoming very, very well understood why this is important. And they want to make sure that the user experience is solid as well. So they're pushing to make it optional. Which type of MFA a consumer would like to use. Is it a push notification to my phone? Is it a SMS? Whatever it might be. So it's exciting. It's becoming far more in the face, I think, of individual consumers who wouldn't have actually recognized it was there a few years ago.
So interesting.
Yeah.
In a typical organization, who should own identity and access management? The IT team, the security team, or both? Well, what do you think?
So I'm definitely going to say the security team. All right. Now, certainly for workforce identity, where the employee identity stuff, I think it's just becoming too important, too complex.
It is a control.
Authentication and authorization are security principles, so they belong under the security team. Where it gets interesting is actually on customer identity. And customer identity today, we're seeing a lot of traction where marketing teams are choosing to own customer identity because they want to own it for the sake of simplifying registration of end users, ensuring those prospects and customers don't drop off.
So identity as an adjacency to relationship.
Yes.
Where you and I would think of identity as being adjacent to access.
Yes. Now, what's interesting is sort of marketing teams are making decisions to say, we really need something here to basically, to do social networking, to support social networking login, to support social networking registration, progressive profiling, things like that. Now, today, we're seeing, Ping sees some organizations have security sort of own that. Other organizations, marketing takes the role in owning that. My personal view is that as soon as there is a data breach of some form, of some magnitude related to the marketing team owning identity, it's going to be fingers pointed at the security team to say, how could you let this happen? And it's going to end up back in the security team, actually. So I think just for that alone, the crown jewels that are your customer identities, consumer identities, should be managed by a team that really thinks about the security aspects of that.
One of my favorite questions to ask guests as kind of a closing thought is whether you're an optimist about cyber or a pessimist about attacks. Which do you think is going to win? The offense, the defense? Are we going to close the gap? Do you see storm clouds on the horizon?
So I've been an optimist in that regard for a long time. So for example, I've always been frustrated by the notion that people's passwords needed to be 35,000 characters long with 1,500 different types of characters, no repeating.
It was never a good idea, right?
No, because it was completely irrelevant.
Right.
All right, as long as you basically blocked anybody who trying to get in who got their password wrong 3 times in a row, you were preventing most attacks. And really, it boiled down to if somebody could access the database. If somebody was accessing the database, a lot worse things are going on than that.
Sure.
So to me, it's I don't know. I'm an optimist in that regard. I am one who would prefer to open things up, not lock things down as much as possible.
Well, that's why we build technology.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't build technology to keep people away from it.
Yes.
I remember I had a colleague who told me once, when I was getting a little crazy with the controls, said, "Hey Ed, you can't innovate in a box."
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's true. It's like I guess you do have to use the tools and technologies we've built. So, luckily,
now,
IAM is an enabler. For
yes.
that,
Now,
right?
the CISO of Ping works for me. So he hates it when I say this sort of thing because, fortunately, he's got he takes the harder line. So I'm always pushing the envelope to basically, see what we can sort of relax essentially, as opposed to sort of following, best practices and policies that I think were written 15 years ago and haven't changed much. That's and I was around when those were being written originally, so I know what the trade-offs were when we made some of those decisions.
Seems like you're still enjoying yourself.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well,
it's exciting times.
Hope you keep doing what you're doing.
Identity is the gift that keeps on giving.
We all benefit.
Changing.
We all benefit from your work.
Right, appreciate it.
I appreciate you stopping by to say hello.
Thank you.
Next time you're in, we'll talk some more.
Absolutely.
Thank
Ed.
you, Patrick.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
We'll see you next time.